The year was 1932, and Calcutta lay heavy under the monsoon sky. The riverfront shimmered with lanterns and reflections of oil lamps as the city bustled with merchants, coolies, and travelers preparing for departure. From the docks rose the elegant silhouette of the Ganges Queen, a luxury steamer bound for Rangoon, promising velvet cabins, white-gloved service, and the promise of exotic adventure down the Irrawaddy. As the ship's horn bellowed through the humid night, a curious collection of passengers made their way up the gangway. Some were known in whispers, others unknown entirely, yet all were about to share a voyage that would bind them together in ways none of them could foresee. First came Mr. Charles Harrington, a stout British industrialist whose fortune had been made in coal and whose enemies numbered as many as his ventures. He strode with arrogance, cane tapping against the wooden boards, his diamond tie-pin flashing like a challenge to the world. Behind him trailed two porters struggling with leather trunks embossed with golden initials. Following close was Eleanor Whitcomb, a French widow wrapped in black lace, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Rumor had it that she had lost her husband under mysterious circumstances in Saigon. Some said it was fever, others whispered it was a duel. Her silence was more telling than any explanation. Leaning casually against the rail, a cigarette glowing in the dusk, was Michael Donovan, an American journalist with a sharp smile and sharper pen. He had been in Calcutta reporting on the shifting winds of empire, but whispers suggested his true interest lay in uncovering scandals that others would prefer buried. Another passenger, tall and contemplative, was Dr. Arun Bose, a Burmese scholar returning from his studies in Europe. His notebooks bulged with sketches and ancient scripts, his gaze often wandering not to the ship, but to the river, as though the water itself carried messages only he could read. Further behind appeared Rajiv Malhotra, a wealthy tea magnate of Assam origin, dressed impeccably in a cream suit, despite the suffocating humidity. His business dealings were legendary, but so were the whispers of unpaid debts and enemies lurking in the shadows of colonial finance. And finally, almost unnoticed among the swirl of silks and linens, was a young woman, Miss Clara Evans, an English governess. Her presence seemed ordinary, her dress modest, her eyes lowered. She carried no trunks, only a small case, as though her entire life fit within it. Few spared her a second glance, and perhaps that was her intention. The captain, a weathered Scotsman named Angus MacGregor, stood at the top of the gangway, tipping his cap to each as they boarded. His face was stern, his eyes shrewd. Years on the river had taught him that the waters were unpredictable, but so too were the souls who sailed upon them. As the last ropes were pulled in and the steamer's paddle wheels churned the brown waters of the Hooghly, the city lights of Calcutta faded into a blur. The passengers gathered for the first evening's dinner in the grand dining hall, a chamber of mahogany panels, glittering chandeliers, and brass railings polished to a mirror's shine. Conversations intertwined like the smoke of cigars. Harrington boasted of his ventures, his voice booming over the clink of crystal glasses. Donovan listened with an amused smirk, occasionally scribbling in his leather notebook. Madame Whitcomb kept to herself, sipping wine slowly, her gloved hands never trembling. Dr. Bose spoke softly with the captain about the history of the river, while Malhotra eyed them all with careful calculation. Miss Clara Evans sat quietly at the far end of the table, unnoticed, pushing peas across her plate. She listened more than she spoke, her gaze occasionally flitting upward when she thought no one was watching. The night deepened, and the ship sailed steadily down the river. Outside, the jungle pressed close. Fireflies flickered like wandering stars, and drums from distant villages echoed across the water. Within the dining hall, the atmosphere was one of anticipation. These travelers had embarked on a journey that promised luxury and leisure. Yet as the detective Samuel Carter, an American traveling incognito, observed quietly from his seat, there was an undercurrent in the air, something restless, like the current of the river beneath them. It was as though fate itself had boarded the steamer that night, and soon, one among them would not see Rangoon alive. The following day dawned heavy and gray. The monsoon sky pressed low upon the river, and the Ganges Queen steamed forward with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. The passengers emerged from their cabins in varying moods. Some were invigorated by the novelty of the voyage, others by the sheer weight of the humidity, their tempers short. On deck, Mr. Harrington leaned against the rail, barking instructions at a steward as though the man were his personal servant. His diamond pin glittered in the dull light, a beacon of arrogance. A few paces away, Rajiv Malhotra lit a cigar, the smoke curling in deliberate defiance, as if daring Harrington to acknowledge his presence. The two men exchanged the briefest of nods, cordial on the surface, but beneath it ran a current of enmity. Meanwhile, Michael Donovan strolled casually across the deck, notebook tucked beneath his arm, his eyes sharp as he recorded everything without seeming to. He paused by Eleanor Whitcomb, who stood gazing at the river, her black lace veil stirring in the breeze. "Strange, isn't it?" Donovan remarked, "how the river hides everything. You could lose a secret here, and it would vanish forever." The widow turned, her lips curving in the faintest of smiles. "Or perhaps," she said softly, "the river remembers everything and returns it when you least expect." Her words lingered in Donovan's mind long after she walked away. Dr. Bose sat in a deck chair with a stack of notes upon his lap. He studied an inscription copied from a temple wall in Bagan, his pen scratching slowly across the page. Clara Evans passed behind him, her small case tucked firmly beneath her arm. She moved like a shadow, always present, never noticed. When she paused to gaze at the jungle, no one thought to ask what she was thinking. By evening, the passengers gathered once more for dinner. The air was tense, though no one could say why. A string quartet played, but their music only heightened the atmosphere. Harrington drank more than his share, his booming laughter rolling across the table like cannon fire. At one point, Donovan raised a glass. "To the river," he said with mock solemnity. "May it carry us smoothly to Rangoon." "To the river," echoed several voices, though Madame Whitcomb raised her glass without drinking. Her eyes never left Harrington, whose cheeks had grown florid with wine. The captain joined them briefly, offering polite conversation, but his watchful gaze never ceased. He noticed the little things, the sudden stillness when Harrington leaned close to Malhotra, the way Clara Evans excused herself early, slipping from the room like mist, or the quiet intensity of Dr. Bose, who seemed half in another world. That night, the river swallowed the moonlight, leaving only the lanterns along the deck to cut through the darkness. A humid silence settled over the ship. Crewmen muttered as they secured the ropes, the sound of water lapping against the hull like whispers in a foreign tongue. Then it came, the sound that would fracture the voyage into before and after. A scream. It tore through the night, sharp and sudden, shattering the fragile calm. Passengers rushed from their cabins, slippers slapping against polished floors. Doors opened, voices rose, questions shouted into the darkness. The scream had come from the starboard side, near the row of luxury cabins, and at the center of it, a steward stood pale and trembling, his lantern shaking in his hand. "Mr. Harrington's cabin," he gasped, his voice cracking. "Something's happened. God help us, something's happened. The passengers froze. Donovan dropped his notebook, his sharp eyes widening. Madame Whitcomb clutched her veil tighter. Malhotra stepped forward with sudden urgency, while Dr. Bose rose silently, his face unreadable. Clara Evans appeared at the edge of the crowd, her small case clutched in both hands, her eyes wide in practiced innocence. Captain McGregor forced his way through. "Stand back," he barked, his accent cutting through the panic. "All of you, back to your cabins until I say otherwise." But none moved. All eyes turned to Harrington's door, where silence had replaced the scream. Behind that door lay the first act of the mystery that would bind them together, and as the lantern light flickered upon the river, the Ganges Queen sailed on, unaware that death had stepped aboard. The corridor outside Harrington's cabin filled with a tense, murmuring crowd. Shadows flickered across the walls as passengers clutched their robes and peered over one another's shoulders. The steward's lantern trembled in his hand, casting a sickly glow on the polished brass fittings. Captain McGregor shoved forward, his heavy boots echoing with authority. He raised a fist and rapped sharply on the door. "Mr. Harrington," he called. "Open up, sir." Silence. He tried again, louder this time, but no response came from within, only the steady thrum of the river's current, like a heartbeat muffled by wood and iron. At last, the captain turned to the steward. "Unlock it." The steward's hand shook as he fumbled with the key. The lock gave with a metallic click, and the door swung open. Gasps rippled through the corridor. Inside, the cabin was a portrait of chaos. A chair lay overturned. A decanter of brandy shattered across the carpet, its amber contents seeping into the fibers like blood. On the bed, sprawled across the white linen sheets, lay Charles Harrington. His eyes stared wide and unseeing at the ceiling. His lips were tinged blue, his skin already pallid beneath the lantern light. The diamond tie-pin still gleamed on his chest, mocking the lifeless man who had once boasted so loudly. "Merciful God," Madame Whitcomb whispered, pressing a gloved hand to her mouth. Malhotra muttered something in Hindi under his breath. Donovan scribbled furiously into his notebook, every detail seized as though the story were already half written. Clara Evans stood at the doorway, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly before her. No one noticed that her eyes flickered not toward the body, but toward the decanter shards glistening on the carpet. Turbaz stepped closer, his brow furrowed. He knelt by the bedside and leaned over the corpse, inhaling faintly. "Not a natural death," he murmured. "The lips, the discoloration, poison, I would wager." The captain cursed under his breath. "Poison? On my ship?" The widow's eyes narrowed. "So it is murder, then." A murmur swept through the passengers. Someone drew a sharp breath, another muttered prayer. The air itself seemed to close in, thick and suffocating. It was then that another figure stepped from the back of the crowd. A tall man, his features angular, his suit impeccably cut, though modest in detail. His eyes were steady, his voice calm. "I believe," he said, "you may require my assistance." Captain McGregor turned sharply. "And who might you be?" The man inclined his head slightly. "Carter, Samuel Carter, detective formerly of New York. I am traveling incognito, but I cannot in good conscience remain silent when a crime has been committed." The captain hesitated, studying him with suspicion, then gave a slow nod. "Very well, Mr. Carter. I'll have need of your expertise." Carter stepped into the cabin. His eyes roved swiftly over the scene, the shattered decanter, the disarray, the body itself. He did not touch anything, merely observed, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. Locked from the inside? He asked. The steward nodded nervously. Yes, sir. I had to open it with the key. Good, Carter said softly. That tells us something already. He crouched near the bed, studying Harrington's rigid hands. In one, faintly clenched, was a corner of paper. Carter eased it free without tearing. It was the torn edge of a letter, no words legible except a single phrase. You will pay for this. Carter folded it carefully and placed it into his pocket. Behind him, Donovan leaned forward eagerly. Well, detective, who is our culprit? Carter straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. At present, he said, every one of us is a suspect. The words fell like a hammer. Passengers recoiled, their voices rising in protest. Malhotra's face darkened with indignation. Madame Whitcomb stiffened, her veil trembling. Dr. Bose's gaze turned inward, thoughtful. Clara Evans remained still, her lips pressed into a thin line. The captain raised both hands. Enough. No one leaves this ship until we reach Rangoon. Until then, we are under investigation. You'll all return to your cabins. Mr. Carter will question you one by one. Reluctantly, the passengers obeyed, dispersing in uneasy silence, but whispers trailed behind them like shadows, accusations, suspicions, fears. As the door closed behind the last of them, Carter stood alone in the cabin with Harrington's body. He gazed down at the lifeless man, the faint scent of bitter almonds still lingering in the air. Poison, he murmured again, but not just any poison. He glanced toward the river outside the porthole, black and endless, beneath the storm-heavy sky. The murderer is clever, Carter said softly to himself, but not clever enough. The morning after Harrington's death broke in shades of gray. Inside, the grand dining hall had been stripped of its usual chatter. Instead, it served as an improvised courtroom. Detective Samuel Carter sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his notebook open before him. Captain McGregor stood at his side, like a judge determined to keep order. The passengers were summoned one by one, each reluctant, each certain of their own innocence, yet each burdened by secrets they hoped would remain buried. The widow Eleanor Whitcomb was the first. Draped in her veil, she glided to the chair opposite Carter, with a poise that belied the tension in her eyes. Mrs. Whitcomb, Carter began, where were you at the time of Harrington's death? Her voice was low, tinged with the softness of Parisian vowels. In my cabin. I retired early. The storm had given me a headache. Did anyone see you? She tilted her chin. No, I was alone, but solitude is not a crime, detective. Carter studied her. You watched Mr. Harrington very closely last night. Because he reminded me of my late husband, she said sharply, loud, cruel, always boasting of what he owned, as though possessions excused sins. The words carried venom, and for a moment, Carter saw the flicker of something dangerous in her expression. The journalist, next, came Michael Donovan, the American journalist. He slouched into the chair, his notebook never leaving his hand. You seem almost pleased, Carter remarked. Donovan smirked. A man like Harrington makes enemies everywhere. His death is a story worth telling. But no, detective, I didn't kill him. I was on deck, smoking, when the scream broke out. Ask the steward. He passed me. And your thoughts on Harrington? Donovan's grin widened. He cheated, bribed, crushed competition. If you're hunting for motives, you'll find them by the dozen. But if you're hunting for killers, he tapped his chest. I prefer my battles in print, not poison. The scholar Dr. Aaron Bose entered with quiet dignity, carrying his notebook as though it were armor. "Doctor," Carter said, "you examined the body. What do you believe killed Harrington?" Bose adjusted his spectacles. "Cyanide, perhaps. The smell was distinct, but as to who delivered it, I cannot say." "Where were you?" "In the lounge, copying inscriptions from memory. The captain passed by and saw me." The captain confirmed with a grunt. Carter leaned closer. "You knew Harrington?" "Only by reputation. His company forced many small traders into ruin in Rangoon. Some were my countrymen. I had reason to dislike him, yes, but hatred is not proof of guilt." His calm demeanor did not waver, but Carter noted the tightening of his hand around the notebook. The magnate Rajiv Malhotra sat stiffly, his cream suit immaculate despite the oppressive heat. His eyes smoldered with indignation. "I will not be treated as a criminal," he snapped, before Carter even spoke. "Yes, I quarreled with Harrington at dinner. Everyone heard. He owed me money, vast sums, and mocked me openly, but I would never tarnish my honor with murder." "Where were you?" Carter asked. "In my cabin, writing letters. My valet can confirm." Carter tapped his pen thoughtfully. "You are a man of business, Mr. Malhotra. You understand that debt can lead to desperation." Malhotra's jaw tightened. "Debt, yes. Murder, no." The governess at last came Clara Evans. She slipped into the chair like a shadow, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. "Miss Evans," Carter said gently, "you were seen leaving the dining room early. Why?" "I was tired," she replied softly. "The noise was too much. I prefer quiet." "Did you know Mr. Harrington?" Her eyes flickered up, then down again. "Not well. He barely noticed me." "Sometimes," Carter said, "it is the unnoticed who see most clearly." She said nothing. Only a faint color rose in her cheeks. Carter watched her closely. There was nothing remarkable about her. A plain face, modest dress, subdued manner, yet something about her silence seemed practiced, deliberate, as though every word she spoke was measured against some invisible scale. The gathering, suspicion. When the interrogations ended, Carter closed his notebook. The dining hall filled again with uneasy murmurs. Each passenger now eyed the others with suspicion. Motives circled like vultures. Debts, hatred, revenge, secrets. Carter addressed them all. "Mr. Harrington was murdered by someone aboard this vessel. The method, poison, suggests premeditation, cunning, and access. Until we reach Rangoon, no one may disembark. You are bound together by circumstance and by the crime that has been committed. I will find the culprit. Count on it." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the creak of the steamer's timbers as it pressed on down the river. Outside, the waters narrowed, and the jungle seemed to lean closer. Inside, suspicion tightened its grip. Harrington's death was only the beginning. The Ganges Queen pushed steadily southward, her paddle wheels chopping at the brown water with mechanical certainty. Yet certainty was the one thing her passengers no longer possessed. The dining hall had become a court of suspicion, the cabins private cells. Conversations hushed at the sound of footsteps, and every clink of silver cutlery seemed an accusation. The river itself had grown narrower, the jungle pressing in close, its vines dangling like fingers ready to snatch the steamer from its course. The air was thick with the scent of rain and damp earth, the sky heavy with clouds. By evening, the atmosphere aboard had turned electric with unease. Detective Samuel Carter roamed the decks with quiet vigilance. He saw how Donovan scribbled in his notebook, his eyes darting to everyone, as though preparing to immortalize their guilt in print. He saw Madame Whitcomb retreat off into solitude, her veil hiding eyes that seemed always wet with unshed tears, or perhaps secrets. Malhotra smoked endlessly, his face set in stone, while Dr. Bose paced with restless energy, muttering phrases from his manuscripts. And Clara Evans. Clara slipped between them all like a shadow, polite, silent, forgettable. So forgettable that Carter noted her absence more than her presence. A sudden alarm. It was well past midnight when the ship shuddered with sudden commotion. A cry rang out from the upper deck, a desperate, terrified cry that sliced through the night. Passengers burst from their cabins once more, their faces pale in the lantern glow. On the starboard deck, near the rail, a struggle had taken place. Rajiv Malhotra clung to the brass railing, his cream suit torn, his cigar case sprawled across the planks. A crewman hauled him upright, while others gathered in confusion. "Someone tried to push me over," Malhotra gasped, his voice shaking with fury. "I was out for air, and a shadow came from behind, hands at my back. I nearly went into the river." Gasps and murmurs spread like fire. Madame Whitcomb clutched her chest. Donovan, eyes alight, muttered, "Another attempt." Captain McGregor demanded order. "Did you see who it was?" Malhotra shook his head violently. It was too dark, only a whisper of cloth, a glimpse of movement. Then, he gestured helplessly at the river, its surface black and endless. "If not for the railing, I would be gone." Carter crouched, inspecting the deck, scratches on the brass where Malhotra's shoes had scraped. A faint smudge, like fabric brushed against wet paint, but no clear clue. He rose slowly, addressing the gathering crowd. This was no accident. Someone aboard grows desperate. Harrington's murder was planned with poison, silent and unseen. This attempt, violent, clumsy, suggests panic. Eyes turned suspiciously in every direction. Donovan looked at Whitcomb, Whitcomb at Bose, Bose at the governess, who lowered her gaze as if to disappear. A web tightens later. In private, Carter paced the captain's quarters. "It doesn't add up," he muttered. "Harrington's death was precise, deliberate. But this feels different. The killer is either attempting to silence a witness or to sow confusion." Captain McGregor crossed his arms. "You think Malhotra was the target?" "Or the bait," Carter replied. "Whoever tried to push him knew the risk of being caught. It was meant to unsettle the rest, to spread fear, and it worked." The captain scowled. "We'll reach Rangoon in 2 days. Can you find them before then?" "I must," Carter said grimly. "If not, there will be more bodies before the shore." Night on the river. That night, the river grew narrower still, hemmed in by mangroves that seemed to whisper as the wind moved through them. Lanterns flickered along the decks, their glow reflected in restless eyes. No one slept easily. Doors were bolted, trunks shoved against locks, passengers lying awake with ears tuned to every creak of timber. Clara Evans moved quietly through the corridor, her small case always in hand. Few noticed her. Fewer still questioned why a simple governess carried her belongings everywhere, as though afraid they might be searched. But Samuel Carter noticed, and as he watched her fade into shadow, he thought, "It is the invisible ones who leave the deepest marks." The river narrowed further, the jungle leaned in, and death, unseen but certain, stalked the decks of the Ganges Queen. The Ganges Queen steamed steadily into her final stretch, the river narrowing into channels choked with mangroves. The air was thick, heavy, and oppressive. as though the jungle itself conspired to smother truth. Inside the grand salon, the passengers gathered once more, summoned by Detective Samuel Carter. The atmosphere crackled with dread. Eleanor Whitcomb sat rigid, her veil pulled tight. Rajiv Malhotra paced like a caged tiger, muttering curses under his breath. Dr. Bose folded his arms across his chest, dignified but restless. Donovan leaned casually against the wall, notebook ready, eyes sharp. And Clara Evans, small, quiet Clara, slipped into her chair unnoticed, as though she were part of the furniture. Carter stood before them, his notebook closed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "this voyage has been shadowed by murder. Harrington's death was no accident, nor was the attempt on Mr. Malhotra's life. The killer walks among us still, and now the river narrows. We have little time left before Rangoon, where escape would be all too easy. The truth must come tonight, visiting the crime." He paced slowly. Harrington was poisoned. Cyanide, swift and unmistakable. Such poison does not appear by chance. It is carried, concealed, prepared. The killer needed both means and opportunity. His gaze swept the room. "Mr. Donovan, you had reason to despise Harrington, but you prefer ink to venom. Your alibi on the deck is confirmed. Dr. Bose, you knew the signs of poison well, but the captain himself saw you in the lounge at the time. Mr. Malhotra, your quarrel was public, yes, but your attempted murder proves you were not the hand behind Harrington's death." Malhotra bristled. "I told you as much." Carter raised a hand. "Madam Whitcomb, you had motive. Your loathing was plain. But hatred alone does not prove guilt. You were in your cabin, unobserved, yet your grief is genuine." Her lips trembled beneath the veil. Carter paused. The silence grew heavy. "That leaves one among us, one who passes unseen, one who carries always a small case, as though guarding something within, one who seemed the least likely, because that is precisely what she intended." His eyes locked on Clara Evans, the governess unmasked. Clara's hands tightened around the case in her lap. She did not speak. "You, Miss Evans," Carter said, voice sharpening, "were the only one with both concealment and access. A governess, quiet, overlooked. You moved about the cabins freely. No one questioned you. And in that case you guard so closely lies not clothing, but the tools of your crime, the vial of cyanide wrapped carefully in linen. Harrington never noticed you, did he? That was his fatal mistake." Clara finally raised her head. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with sudden intensity. "You think me invisible," she said softly. "And you are right. All my life I have been the shadow in the room, the plain governess, the one no one remembers. Harrington was the same as all the others. He mocked me, dismissed me, crushed those I cared for under his heel. My brother worked for his company in Rangoon. Harrington ruined him, drove him to despair, to death. I vowed he would pay." Gasps filled the salon. Madame Whitcomb clutched her veil. Malhotra froze mid-step. Clara's voice grew steadier, sharper. "So I planned. I bought the poison in Calcutta, hid it in my case. On the second night, when Harrington staggered to his cabin drunk, I slipped inside with a smile and a tray of tea. He never thought to question the governess. Why would he? He drank, and in moments he was gone. I left unseen, silent as ever, invisible." Her confession hung in the air, chilling, terrible in its clarity. The end of the voyage. Carter's face was grave. You murdered in cold blood, Miss Evans. Whatever your pain, justice is not yours to wield. The law will decide your fate in Rangoon. Clara looked at him with an odd serenity. The law ignored my brother. It will ignore me too, but at least Harrington cannot hurt anyone again. Crewmen stepped forward at the captain's signal, their hands firm on her shoulders as they led her away. She did not resist. She only looked back once, her eyes fixed on the river beyond the window, where the jungle leaned close and the current pulled ever forward. The passengers sat in stunned silence. Some pitied her, others loathed her, but none would ever forget her. As the Ganges Queen pushed into the dawn, Rangoon's spires rose faintly in the distance. The mystery was ended, the invisible hand revealed. Yet for Samuel Carter, the river carried more than bodies. It carried the haunting truth of human despair, vengeance, and the lengths to which the unseen will go to be seen.